Welcome to the fourth space where we're having the Bad Game Arcade. Thank you so much for being here, Winnie and Sharina. So we're going to go around the space today for anyone who's watching or tuning into this, and we're going to kind of go through the games that are here in the Bad Game Arcade. All of us in some capacity make or work on educational games, so we're going to play them a little bit. We're going to give our hot takes. We're going to talk about them and kind of the experience of the week, because Winnie and Sharina were able to help out with some of the workshops here as well. So we're going to talk a little bit and do a bit of a retrospective on the Bad Game Arcade 2023. So would you first both want to introduce yourselves, just for people, so they know a little bit about your credentials?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay. You said yes
I did
first,
say
so
yes.
you have to
yes.
go.
Okay. So I'm Winnie. I am a software developer. I currently work at Prodigy Education, but I have worked previously on other games as well. I work on their math game. And yeah, that's what I do.
We cannot share all the secrets of Prodigy today.
Unfortunately not.
And who else is here?
So I'm Sharina. I work at Wizards of the Coast at their digital preschool division. So I currently work on making games for Peppa Pig.
Hi. So we're gonna talk about the good and bad, but before we actually jump into any of the games, what would you both consider to be a bad game, and what would you both consider to be a good game?
Oh God.
There's
so many factors.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll do it
clearly
short.
not for their audience.
Okay, a game not designed for its audience. Yeah, for me, it's a game that is pretending to, the chocolate covered broccoli trap of it's just a point system on top of a quiz, or a story game that doesn't actually give players choice in the story. It's actually just a book. To me, those are bad educational games.
Yeah. Or one where you don't know what the objective is.
Yeah,
what
I would say
learning?
lacking objective.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess if it's a bad educational game, it's not realizing what you're supposed to learn.
Yeah.
Not learning the thing.
But you wouldn't put bad So sometimes if we're writing a commercial game, we say this game's bad, the graphics are gross, or this game's bad, the animations are poor. But that's not, for at least me, a concern of what makes a good or bad educational game.
For me, it would be, because then it affects actual playability. How are you supposed to learn the thing, or how are you supposed to reinforce concepts that you want, I guess, kids to learn if they're not able to play the game? Right?
So there's a level of graphics you expect.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would agree too. If it's at a point where it's unplayable, then that will, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, or if it's confusing to play.
Yeah.
Because the
Or
graphics aren't
Not fun to play.
Graphics, also
Yeah.
gameplay. If the gameplay is confusing, it detracts from actually learning anything or figuring out what the goal is, you know, stuff like that.
So then today, as we go through these games, what are you both going to be looking for to kind of justify what's a good or better quality educational game? What are you looking for in those playthroughs?
Design. That's literally my role now.
I think for me it'd be bugs.
Bugs?
Yeah, as a software developer.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think if we can find bugs, then it's going to kind of lower down what we're looking for. And if the design's not smooth, is what you're kind of getting at in design?
Yeah. How easy it is to get into the game. What are what do you call it? I was going to say instructions, but what's the level curve like?
Yeah. I think that's fair.
Game
Difficulty?
mechanics, the amount of text you might have to read,
Exactly.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, text is really important when you're working with kids too.
Yeah,
'cause,
exactly.
Yes.
I mean, at what age?
Depending on the age range, you want no text or very little text.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, let's jump into the first one. So the first one that we have right here is Black Fawn. And this is made by Gahenda Wax, who was on a panel on Monday talking about Indigenous game design. And so for anyone who's interested in playing, this is just the first chapter of a 20-chapter game. So it's not the full game. It's the demo version, as it says at the bottom. And the game kind of is touching on themes associated with missing Indigenous women in Canada. And so it's, you may even follow this in the section of serious or social impact games that some people refer to, where some in academia like to draw a line between those spaces. But I have played this game before, but perhaps one of you wants to jump in through the story.
All right.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah?
Let's do it.
I am the closest, so I will start.
Tap anywhere.
Yeah. We got
See,
this
See, that's the
beauty-
first thing I noticed, right? Because you started tapping anywhere, and I
was
noticed
do I
that with
tap
the
here?
kids.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no way to emphasize where you're supposed to tap.
Right.
That's the first thing. Sorry.
No. I think
Keep
that's
talking. I'm gonna click through it. Maybe you
I
can
mean, even
talk,
if we look
yeah.
at like the interface right now, right? So we have
Yeah.
like a variable screen. I'm assuming this is kind of like the introductory text, kind of like bringing us into the game, or perhaps we're in their mind right now.
Mm-hmm.
I try to see.
I'm gonna try some stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that brings us back.
Oh, okay. I was just a little curious.
I mean, that's good to know. That's
Yeah.
how you reset the game.
I thought that was.
we're-
I thought maybe that was the
I
menu
feel
or
like I
something.
tried that before and it didn't do that for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Interesting.
So
Sorry.
how is it opening for it? I mean, I'm really trying to read it upside down right now. So what's the opening of this game like?
Yeah.
I mean, it is like introductory text.
Yeah. Obviously, they've left this area very static because they want your attention
Yeah.
here.
It's interesting. You can't really see it, but there is like a forward arrow here. It's in white.
Oh,
And
really?
it's yeah. It's very, very.
Oh,
there,
yeah.
do you see it?
Yeah. And then when you
yeah.
look closely, I had to shift my angle on the screen.
And I don't know if this
Yeah.
is a button, if it's like a fast
But I think
forward.
you can touch anywhere. This
Yeah, I
art's
think you can touch
amazing.
anywhere. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. One thing I would consider is like the font that you choose for accessibility purposes as well. If you're looking, if
Right.
you're thinking about someone who has dyslexia, right? Like you want to
Yeah.
pick a font that's like easier to read.
Yeah. So it's kind of just describing the image that was before us. So we were
Yeah.
in a dream, is what we kind of open with. I do think that opening kind of image that you kind of get, right? Because you're starting with just text, and then all of a sudden it just hits you with that image. It's like a very powerful image to kind of start a game with. Not only does it kind of show the indigenous roots that this game is kind of embedded in, but also the black handprint on the face really references some of the themes. Not in, like, it's not screaming at you what the themes are, but if you're kind of aware of the challenges of indigenous women, it's you already are kind of like, okay, this game's probably going to talk about that a little bit.
I remember in like the previous panel, you talked like there was like a conversation about like what makes a game like indigenous,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah,
like,
and I mean, I think that's a really interesting conversation that they were able to kind of have in that panel of
exactly.
like, for them, some of them were just like, it has to be purely from the ground up made with indigenous individuals on the team, right? And I didn't really get into it in the panel, but I'd be really interested to kind of hear how different nations kind of also feed into that conversation, because I know that Gehendawax is working on language games around the Mohawk language, where they themselves are still learning that language, right?
Yeah.
And so how do kind of the different nations that exist, how does that change kind of the design goals and design paths, which is really interesting. But it's great to see products like this kind of coming out, because
Exactly.
I mean, I don't know about you both, I feel like the average mainstream game space won't make something like this. Like, you need kind of indie stuff. So I think
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to see if I could like break.
You're trying to-
trying to break-
I am
Why?
trying to see if I can break the game.
Oh my God.
Okay, I want. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are emulating. Yeah, that's right. This is designed for like a phone or an iPad or another kind of
I'll keep
tablet.
going.
We're gonna spam back through to where
Yeah.
we were. So you were texting someone? Is that what was happening?
Yeah, I thought it was a little interesting that all the tech, like you're mostly focused on here until like an image changes, except when the text changes and it goes to this, the name is a bit blocked on
Yeah, there's a
because of that menu or the not quite menu.
the reset.
The reset.
Yeah.
And the text format
It
changes.
was ... though.
Yeah, there's a ... Which,
But you just click through it, right?
yeah, you can just
Yeah.
click through it. And then you could reply or don't reply.
What are you gonna do?
Let's don't reply.
Wow.
Cold.
Avoidant.
I mean, it's morning. We just woke up. We had a bit of a startling dream.
Yeah. That's cool that it gives you that option as well.
Yeah.
I'm like curious to see if there's like a branching narrative that kind of
Yes.
goes with
Yeah, and this, right, and again, this is also the
Yeah.
first chapter. I don't know if any of you have worked on narrative adventure games before, but they typically start relatively like setting the scene,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
then it opens up. I mean, like the OGs, like Colossal Cave Adventure, that one you're kind of just like, you wake up and you choose where to go. But I think a lot of the genre has shifted more to like this storybook style of like, we're gonna set the scene and then kind of go from there. I think this is our main character we just saw. Was that, yeah?
That was a good question. I thought that was the friend.
Was that the friend?
I don't know. I actually don't know anymore.
Right.
Well, we will find out. So I think this is also set in university, like we're on campuses, like we're not in high school
Yeah.
anymore in the narrative of this game, which I think is typically. I mean, how do you feel about like the ages represented in games that are educational? Like, I mean, I don't think this game is designed for children, and so for me, it makes sense to be set
Yeah.
in like an undergrad space. But if like you were making a version of this for kids, would you still do a college student as your protagonist?
I don't think so.
Yeah, probably not, just because you want to have that, you want to be able to have that like connection and immersion.
Yeah,
And it might be hard to do that if it's like an older audience member
I think that's fair.
or
Yeah.
audience member.
Yeah, I
character.
mean, if you think
Yeah.
of like children's media too, right? Like shows designed for like 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-5,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the protagonist is like 8 to 12.
Yeah.
Right? They're like just a few years older. And I do remember like when you're in school, like someone who's like in grade 5 was like so much more cool and like ahead of you when you're like younger, right? Because they're the ones that come and like read books for you and you're like grade
Yeah.
1 class from time to time.
But
So-
that's not to say you can't have like multiple perspectives.
no, of
right?
course, yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking of Bluey because it's Bluey.
So
I love Bluey.
something I did notice is dialogue and narration happens in the exact same spot.
Okay.
I guess that does happen with a lot of these types of games.
Yeah.
I forget what they're called.
Narrative adventures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
narrative adventure games.
Yeah.
But it does feel a little confusing sometimes. It does tell
Like,
you
you
who
prefer it
is
to come up
talking.
again like the phone?
I wonder if there needs to be like a bit of a slightly different UI change, because there is a name that pops up that says
Oh,
who's
just like have like a
narrating.
second
Like-
piece of paper appear with like the name
Or
on it?
even
something?
just like, you know,
It
how
does
like
do
a lot of
this,
narrative games will
yeah.
have like that little like profile picture
Yeah.
of like the person who is talking.
Yeah, I don't think that happened in the previous conversation in the previous scene.
Yeah.
So sometimes there's a person that pops up and they talk, and then sometimes it looks like there isn't.
And so
Yeah.
what's the story been about so far? Because I haven't been foing so much of what you've been
Yeah,
doing.
I feel like I've just been talking with you. So.
I was kind of like listening to both of you talk at the
Okay.
same time. But it is like a friend, this main character's friend has come to school and is, and I think like unpacking stuff, and they're going to the cafeteria right now.
Okay. And we're talking about French class. And so the only choice we've had so far, and we've been playing for about 5-ish minutes, has been the phone choice, if I'm correct, right? Which, again, I'm not here to like say that you can't make a narrative adventure game that is really more just a story, right? Like you could also frame it as like an interactive story. The question becomes like how much of it is prescribed walkthrough and how much of it is actually player choice. I think those are points to like think
Yeah.
about.
Like this is really like just a visual novel that you're
Yeah,
going through,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of good enough its own way. Oh, so here's a choice. So you're going to tell her the truth, or you're going to avoid the question? I like how your first instinct as a software dev is just to like poke the table everywhere.
Yes.
That's really funny.
Yeah, so like I forgot what you
Well, so I mean, I don't
I
want
told
to
the
like
truth.
the part of the thing is like we have a lot of games to get through today, so we're not going to probably
Yeah.
finish this game
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
But this is still like the first chapter, right? And so as an introduction, how are we feeling? You're the one that's been playing it.
I think for me, I would have to sit down and like fully concentrate on all the dialogue that's happening, because there is a lot of dialogue.
Yeah.
And if you miss a couple of things to read and you're focusing on something else, I think maybe you perhaps might get a little lost.
Yeah. I think that I see this game being helpful maybe for like high school and undergrad ages. Like there's a lot of text to go through for like younger audiences.
Yeah,
And the themes themselves also might be a bit intense for younger audiences.
Yeah,
that-
and the other thing we're not getting here because it's the display model is like the audio.
well, so you could try if you wanted to listen in.
I was going to ask if there was audio.
See
Yeah.
it now.
Yeah, I probably should have informed you of that at the very start. Is it playing anything right now?
Okay, so there's background music, but there's no like
No.
VO.
Okay, I was going to ask.
Yeah,
So voiceover, VO,
Yeah.
for
yeah.
anyone
Sorry,
listening.
voiceover. Yeah.
Is there a sound of the ticking of the text? Some narrative games have that, like.
yeah, yeah.
No.
No,
Okay.
no. I was like,
Okay.
yeah.
So we've been asking, the people that come in this space to rate the game out of 5, and I know we haven't finished the game, but like based off what you're seeing so far and what you're thinking, what's your thoughts on the game?
I do want to mention one thing. When we did kind of help facilitate the class.
Yeah.
There were a couple of kids who thought that some of the noises were very loud,
Oh, okay.
and it could just be the volume,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
Like the background music.
Yeah, maybe like certain sound effects.
Yeah. I mean, my take on this is it's a demo version. It's the first chapter of a 20-chapter arc that I think it is a promising start for a subject that's really hard to get into.
Absolutely.
And for a subject that it's talking about, I do think like more text is sometimes maybe the play because you don't want people to make certain interpretations of what you're talking about.
Yeah. What I would do is like think about how you can differentiate. Like right now, like from what we've seen, it looks like she's writing in like a diary or a journal about like the day's events. So maybe to like kind of bring in a little bit more immersion.
Right.
Think about like how maybe you can use like this space right now that's like currently static, like maybe like a small amount of like animation or something to like connect what's happening here to the text, right?
I mean,
and
I
see like they
that would
bring
come
in
down to the team
characters and
though,
stuff.
right? Like to add animations is a whole other layer of
I know,
labor,
I know. But just like think about how to help with like more immersion aspects. And then also like ways to think about, well, how can you like differentiate between like a conversation that's happening versus like the narrative, internal narrative that's or monologue that's happening, right? And that could be something as simple as like having like a picture of the person who's talking, and it'll like help you connect.
I mean, I think in this
character.
place, I think you're correct that this is supposed to be this person.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, did you have any final thoughts before we move on to the next game?
I think we kind of brought up a lot of. I kind of wish there was a little bit more interactivity. Perhaps I know this is a visual novel, so maybe there is like a downtime almost. This is just adding features, which isn't really like.
There's more that could be added on
exactly.
top, but for what we have right now, we're all seeing kind of potential here that is really exciting.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. So what we're looking at here is When Rivers Were Trails.
Not quite yet.
As it's loading. What we're about to look at here.
I forgot this is
This is the other game in the space that's about, has indigenous themes to it. It's also a narrative adventure game. It was made by a pretty large team who's mostly found across the United States from different nations. I would have to double check for that. If people are interested, you can go on the website and find all the information about this game there, When Rivers Were Trails. But it's a story game. And I know, did you talk to any of the students that were playing this the other day?
Yeah, a couple. I did try to ask if they knew what the story was about, and a couple of them explained, but they were also just very into the game that they didn't really always respond to what I was
It's
asking.
true. It's kind of like, even right now, I'm like looking at your 4 choices to choose your starting clan for the game.
Yeah.
Do you know which one you're feeling? I have so many questions about just the art for these too, because it looks very intentional.
Yes.
But I'm not unsure of the intent. I'm assuming they're rivers, given the title of the game, and the fact that it looks like they flow into bodies of water. But again, I could be
I like it.
totally correct. This is you.
All right. Good quick. Oh, okay. Move north, south, east, or west by clicking this or your destination. Continue. Okay.
Get a compass.
Okay.
Your survival depends on your mental, emotional.
You have a health meter, and so, well, it's well-being meter, but for anyone who's played games, we know that that is a thing that exists across many titles.
Together hunt fish.
You have resources to manage. In this case, it's foods and medicines.
Okay.
You can take a break.
Great. Love that.
I do like games that have pause and save features.
I know.
Safe travels on your journey. Okay. Very interesting way of, I guess, introducing the mechanics.
Yeah.
Which is less about if you click on this.
Yeah, it was just like, here are your things.
Yeah.
Also, 1890 is the start. I like the old film aesthetic that we're kind of getting here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can also hear sound through there if anyone wants to listen.
One person clicks, one person
One person listens.
Bring it all together, right?
Yeah. All right. Okay. Yes. Okay, got it.
So we've already moved out of the story into some choices. Like if we're comparing the last narrative game we played, there already immediately are some like options here. You can already tell you're missing half your health. What did you do?
I don't know. But like, yeah.
So you're allowed to go anywhere, it looks like.
Yes. So either clicking on the map
So you can
Or
click
the
on
compass.
compass. Yeah,
or you
that's
click on the
what I'm
compass.
saying.
also like, where am I? Okay. Oh,
So yeah, I
got
am
it,
confused as to where, oh, you're here.
Do you
Yeah.
click on that?
I think
do you click
click
on
No,
the
you
actual
click on
compass.
the actual thing
The-
here, but
yeah.
I think I almost wonder if either like this symbol could be a bit bigger.
I can't tell if it's the symbol from the bottom right or if it's actually where you are on the map.
I think this is supposed to be where you are.
Look at it. Okay, well,
Right.
let's try going
But
somewhere and
yeah.
see what happens.
Okay, so all of these are faded out, and north is the
Only
only
go
one
north,
that's like.
yeah.
Yeah. So this is it did move. I don't know if you saw that it moved when you click north. Your little symbol moved up.
Yeah. So maybe like a little bit of time for me to see that.
So you found a story you can read, which
Yes.
means you have choice right now if you want to like get all the
Tap to
narrative.
read. Scroll down to read the interactions and stories. Oh, got it. Okay. It's needed. You can always keep track of your. Do I scroll? Okay. Yep. Got it.
So it's interesting because you can kind of just skip the narrative parts if you wanted to.
Yeah.
At least that's what it looks like.
I feel like this could be bigger.
The box
The box, the text box.
or the
Or-
text within the box.
I would actually say the text could be bigger because you have a lot of room for it.
There's a
Or
lot
maybe
cut
not.
off. Like
Mm.
it's almost like there's only like an actual.
I
amount
guess
where
I'd
the
just be
text is
sad if the
shown.
box is bigger because the art looks really cool,
Yeah.
and I kind of like want to see a little bit more of what is pictured here.
Yeah.
Which I think is a balance that sometimes these games have when they
Yeah.
use this kind of template of like we make art, but then where do we put the actual text box?
Okay. So right now we're looking.
So you've
inside,
collected
but-
some tobacco. It looks like.
Yep. So it actually like, pays for you to like read
Read through the
yeah,
story. That's good.
rather than to skip.
So I can already see why some of the students from yesterday were more interested in this option than
Yeah.
the other one that we had there because you already have a little bit more agency.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even if it's just a matter of like,
Clicking specific.
yeah,
options.
you're like still working through like this very linear storyline, but just the fact that like, oh yeah, we looked in here, we see this, we looked in like this container, we have
Yeah.
these items and we just picked them up. Like,
Yeah, no, and I mean, I find that this game already has like animations connected to some of your clicks, which I think can feel rewarding as well as you're going through the story. Like it breaks up the images a lot. But one of the things that I've definitely noticed with the students that I've worked with in these spaces is that having more choices for them in a title always gives them more excitement to play the game. Like the more options that they have, the better that they're feeling.
Okay. I just wanted to know what would happen.
that's fair. Oh, kind of.
Now it does seem like you're pretty directed at the start, but like we said before, that's kind of typical of the genre.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I did notice, because like I instantly wanted to click here and here because I thought they were.
Yeah, I also
like-
thought you could pluck the leaves was the thing that might happen
Yeah.
for your medicines.
Yeah, when we were here, I immediately thought maybe you could click on the words.
Yeah, but you can't, right? You can just click on the arrow, I think
Yeah.
is what it meant.
Yeah.
Right?
And they did specify that, but maybe like another thing to like kind of reinforce that would be to either have those interactable objects
right.
like different in some way than what the background is, because right now like
Yeah.
yeah.
It's true, yeah.
But-
Yeah, maybe like a directional thing where it's just like for the first time you actually see this, there's like a pointer pointing towards where
Yeah.
you can click.
Or like it's pulsing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of like having arrows to be like, look, this.
You're not a fan
I'd
of
rather,
it.
yeah, no, I'd rather have it like, it should be like emphasized in a way that like it's not that apparent, because if
Yeah.
you have to do that, then it's just like, I don't know, it's too much.
Yeah, no,
Or that
and-
might be a personal thing, but it's just like, it kind of breaks that immersion, and it's also like a lot of hand feeding.
I
where it's
do like the stories broken up though with a map. Like I will just say,
Yes,
like I
yeah.
like that we're coming out of one kind of frame into a very different kind of frame of interaction, and then
Oh,
probably
absolutely.
back into another thing.
I'm just like, make this bigger or like a different color so it stands out, and I know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel
find
like
it, but-
in like larger AAA games, if you did something like this, you would have the map that you can zoom in and out of parts of,
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
So it would like center you here in the screen. And like if you play like Elden Ring, right? Like not that this is anything comparable to Elden Ring because they're very different styles of games, but like this would be in the middle of the map, and then as you scroll out, you can like see all the other maps to go to. Whereas I think this is saying this is everywhere this game is going to be taking place.
Yeah, like this
We're
is-
going to travel through here and uncover the stories along the way,
Exactly.
which is the goal of what it's trying to get at.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I wouldn't worry about the zooming in and out. It's just like that one thing. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love the
Oh.
art style in this game.
Yeah,
I do
beautiful.
too.
It's like a very like watercolor-esque kind of aesthetic. And I think like images are so critical in an educational game. Like a wall of text in a learning game is going to struggle with, especially kids, but across the board.
Yeah.
And then it's just like you're reading a book.
Yeah.
Really, like it's just yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm totally down for like interactive novels. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. But yeah, it's nice to see. So you're gonna hunt with this person? Is that what's happening? Correct?
Yes.
I do.
Yeah. So again, this is one of the things
Oh,
where
you
like
can
you
hunt,
can
yeah.
choose to like be a part of the story or like leave.
But by hunting with them, you're also choosing certain things, right? You're choosing to stand.
Yeah.
Right,
I'm just
and-
gonna say leave and see what happens.
You just leave the
Yeah.
story. Which is interesting because I feel like this is one of those games that if we were to come back to, like if we were to play through the whole thing, we would perhaps and do a play again and choose different options. There might actually be differences in what's happening, which to me is a sign of a well done kind of educational game, or at least narrative game, is one that there is replayability that would potentially feel fresh.
Like I'm wondering if you like as you go along, if you have the option to go back or not, or maybe
Yeah, and I do
Maybe
like
don't,
already,
because they're
there's been signs in the narrative that I've just like picked up on of like how you're feeling on the trail. Like right there is like you feel unsafe as you walk home, but also like in making that allegiance with that group to hunt with them or not, you're making certain kind of allies around the spaces that you're in,
yeah.
which I think is really interesting.
I
And
love this.
I think one thing I really like is when if you go into like the next part.
Yeah.
While this block of text does kind of block the really like beautiful artwork, it makes it so much easier to read the text.
Oh yeah.
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 I agree. And what is this? Do we know what this is up here?
Oh.
Okay.
So you can
No.
keep tabs on it during the story. Okay, this
Yeah.
is another menu feature.
Well, like I didn't know this existed until you pointed it out.
I feel like this is a game that,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
well, it doesn't need facilitation. I think it would be incredible to play it with one of the people who made it.
Yeah.
Like they're able to kind of break down kind of all of what led to this, and you can see your options and choices and like the impact of doing so.
Yeah.
Um,
I tried this thing on.
which is really interesting.
Oh, you clicked trade.
And I'm gonna have us kind of like stop there just because we have other games
Yeah.
to get through the space. But what's your 1 minute take on When Rivers Were Trails?
I like it.
You like it?
Yes, I do. I felt like I was able to engage with the story a little bit more. And you feel a little bit more immersed in it. Just like the fact that you have a semblance of choice, even like
Yeah.
if it's just like you can leave if you don't want to like engage with a certain dialogue or not. Or
For
you can,
sure.
like-
And I
but
mean,
it's yeah.
I also find this game like a game that I'm interested in to see where it goes. You know what I mean? Like, I
Exactly,
want to
yeah.
know how my choices will impact me because it gives me Oregon Trail vibes.
Yeah.
Right? Of like your early choices might not seem overly important, but then as we get further along the trail, I feel like these meters that they've set up in place
Yeah.
will matter.
Yeah, and you get that like right from the get-go when you have the choice to leave or stay,
Yeah,
and it like actually shows you like, oh, you missed out on this maybe, or like,
exactly.
yeah,
So what's your
Yeah.
one sentence thought?
Yeah, I would be really interested in just like sitting down and playing through this. So I would definitely just like play through this by myself, like
Yeah.
look at the art.
It's free.
Oh, okay.
You can find it online.
Yeah.
To play.
I do wonder if there could be like a little bit more in terms of like
That's nice.
first time
Yeah.
user experiences, like in terms of interacting with like the main interface.
Right.
But other than that, the art's really great.
Yeah.
You're able to read the text that you're supposed to read really easily.
Yeah, I could see multiple lesson plans being made with something like this, like from the standpoint of like an educational learning experience. I think this is pretty well done.
Yes.
Yep.
And so why don't we move to the next one? Rainbow Billy, The Curse of the Leviathan. Okay, I know that we might be sick of this soundtrack by now in the space, but I still think it's lit. I mean, this is, out of all the games, definitely had the most money that went into this game. And this is made by a team that doesn't consider themselves an educational games company. But it's a game that they realized has been picked up and used for talking about serious social issues. Are we actually, are we live right now? Like, I don't, just so I know if I should talk about rotisserie chicken again or not. Okay. We are live. Yeah, so as we kind of figure out the controllers here, we got Rainbow Billy, the main character there, who is Billy, is a non-binary child.
Okay.
He's kind of a key point of the narrative.
Okay.
And we had a panel on Wednesday where the creators of Mana Void were in it, kind of talking about the game. And so Mana Void is a company, like, is not an explicitly educational games company, but they make products like Rainbow Billy that talk about issues in a very like playful way that you can kind of start to address it. And the other thing we talked about with them is violence in educational games. And I actually am curious, because you have a game that, I mean, we talked about this a bit with the kids too,
Yes.
but now we're not talking to children about this. Like, what are your thoughts on violence in educational games?
That's a tough thing to talk about, and I think there's definitely a lot of like nuance that could be said. Overall, I feel like violence in educational games is overall not a good thing, but also
Are you on?
yes.
Okay.
Overall, I feel like there is some sort of appeal for violence in games.
Conflict.
Yes and no. Well, like my question is why? Why do you want violence in like
Yes.
this particular game? Like, because I know some people would be like, oh, we're gonna make a fighting game because fighting games are cool, but we're gonna make it a fighting game about, you know, learning a language. And I'm like, why this route? Like, there's so many other ways you can do this too,
Yeah.
right? And
There's when we like facilitated that class yesterday, I did actually notice that a lot of the groups came up with ideas that weren't violent.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
No, they were really into sports.
Yeah, a lot of
the one group
sports.
did have a gun like shooting down aliens in a
That was
soccer
the
stadium.
exception, I think.
But I actually thought that out of the options, they actually had at least like an educational component slapped into it with like protractors and stuff. And so it looks like we might be set to go. But I do think the conversation of like, so like this game, there's conflict, but you're not like, you are taking damage and you're dealing damage, but it's done through like conversation.
Yeah.
They look angry and they flew away from you.
I do think a lot of educational games now are trying to skirt that line. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you aren't battling people, you are having a conflict, or you're not hitting them. You're using like a magical thing to like free them from something.
Yeah. Like their health bar isn't actually their health; it's some other kind of conundrum. I mean, I know that like the space of board games is actually a really interesting history in that. So Euro games, I don't know how familiar you are both with board games, but there's a style of games called like Euro games, which like Settlers of Catan builds out of, or Ticket to Ride.
Yep.
And those games were starting. Eurogames history was designed in Germany post World War II when they didn't want games about war, but there were people who wanted to make like complex games, which has historically been made around war. And so Eurogames emerged as like, okay, we want to make a game. It can't have like military conflicts. So what other conflicts can we introduce? And so like, well, we'll make a game about like farming and the challenges of doing that, or we'll make a game about building train infrastructure in Europe. And so it's like a really interesting thing where like once we kind of take away the need for conflict or the need for violence in those games, it can actually open some really interesting kind of like perspectives and make some like really fun games. So what are you doing right now, by the way?
I'm trying to figure out the controls.
Okay. You've fallen down.
This is
onto the
something that I
beach.
didn't notice before, but like this open world or environment that you're in, it's largely like grayscale with like,
That's intentional.
right? Yeah. Whereas like as they explored more of it became like
Yeah.
bright and vibrant.
So
one
there-
of the parts is you're trying to restore color to the world because the villain
Makes
has
sense,
taken it
Brando
away.
Billy.
Yeah.
And you're using your kind of kindness to reinstill like color on people and the places that they live.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing in terms of interaction that I notice is if you look at the top right corner of the screen, there
Yeah.
are directions. But if you look at the keyboard itself and the things that they're expecting you to click on,
They're not
they're
nicely
jumbled.
together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not in the order you expect them to.
It is recommended you play it on controller.
Yeah,
And I think on controller, the mapping's probably more than fine.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
But I do think on keyboard, you can probably remap it if we really spend time in the settings.
Right.
There's a punch option. Oh no, it's
So you've encountered a conflict
okay.
with Alpha Roar.
good doggy.
Good
No one's
doggy.
threatening anyone.
And I remember when a kid at one of the workshops came across Alpha Roar, because this was a big component in the one workshop because no one could beat Alpha Roar in the game.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
that's what made me very intrigued.
Is that they would just
Alpha
skip
Roar.
all the text. And it's a game that's about conversations and like properly managing those relationships.
Here's the
They
thing-
did know he was a bully though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, one
Yes.
thing I'm not a huge fan of, and the way they presented the text in that dialogue, I love that they had like the previous text there, and that they really like highlighted who was talking. But like, why do you need the actual letters to like jiggle that much?
I thought it was like for emphasis to like point to certain things.
Yeah, I feel like that's. I mean, depending on the age range and also accessibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
That
it's. I think that's because I would almost argue that in some cases that makes it more accessible for slow readers because then they just catch the words they're supposed to catch.
Yes,
Yeah.
but in this case, all of the text was like
Right.
Yeah.
jiggling.
So right now I'm in like a battle
You're in
situation.
conflict
I'm
and
in
you have two
conflict.
choices.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
two choices, which is talk and listen. What I find interesting though is that when you bumped into things in like the world map, it told you what keys to click on. Here, it's not telling you
No,
if you click enter or not. Or
I
what
agree.
am
I think you
supposed to
do click
on.
enter for the
Yeah.
record.
Yeah, now there's a continue thing.
Yeah, like
Press
look at
Yeah.
all that jiggling. Why? Like you don't need.
I do think it's for emphasis.
So it seems as if
No,
he
but I
thinks
feel
that
like you
you've
can
hurt
emphasize
his
a different way.
younger
That's just-
brother is the problem here. So what would you like to do? Belittle
You
him,
get
sympathize with him, or be
options.
concerned about his concerns?
Sympathize with be concerned about his concerns. That's kind of a funny option. Let's pick that one.
See, look, why isn't this? Oh, okay, no, I get it. Okay,
Rodrigo's your friend on your back.
Right.
And he's.
Oh, so
The
just
hand.
Billy doesn't talk. Rodrigo talks.
It looks as if Rodrigo is the one speaking.
you
on
can't do
Billy's
everything
behalf.
for your baby brother, or you can make him over reliant.
So only certain text is like jiggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Emphasis, yeah.
So as you kind of
What is
talk, you
that?
uncover some of the symbols related to the things, and you'll see that you have 4 little character tokens. Kids call them Pokemons. They're not actually Pokemons, but and you'll see that they have some of those symbols on them, right? So like
These are locked.
the lock is I think an ability you get later on. When you like play with
okay,
them
got
more
it.
and use them more, but like you see the ones that are unlocked, like you see how that one has like the purple symbol that you just unlocked on the dog or on Alpha War, sorry.
Right.
And so if you play that and you do its minigame properly, you might get that symbol on Alpha War, which will then help you win the combat.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this one has that symbol.
So you probably want to play that one.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So this one is independent, empathetic,
Yeah. Friendly.
friendly.
So you're like tying kind of social and moral cues into the
Okay.
actions happening. I feel like there's a lot of thoughts going through your head.
Yes, there are.
I can't read it very well. Yeah, anyway.
What is kind of confusing to me is that it seems like there's 2 different, like, I guess, quote unquote, health bars.
Mm-hmm.
So Billy has one that's morale, and the bully dog has these question mark tokens above
Yeah.
it.
Which you unlock through your
which One of
conversation.
them seem to unlock, but it seems to unlock a specific one. I guess there's different shapes under the other ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you can choose up to 3. So you have one more that you can choose because you have 3 moves on your turn.
I see. Let's just end my turn, I guess. I don't.
I would at least use all your moves.
Oh, okay.
You know, don't waste a move. I mean, that's gamer 101. If you got the action, use the action.
If you have the ability for that move to be added on to your next turn.
It does not stack.
Okay, well.
Which, yes.
Try to destroy Alpha Roar. Big mistake.
So he's going to, I think.
Oh. My creatures were just
He's
ran away.
scared away your friends.
Yeah.
His barking is worse than his bite. So there are certain things that are threatening to his feelings. Now you have a mini game.
Oh no.
You were not ready.
Yikes.
To be fair, you have skipped the tutorial of this game. Like you
Oh,
are
I see.
in where the kids were last.
I feel Ilya grown. I feel safe.
What do you think is the right thing to say here?
Oh boy. None of these options feel that good.
None of them feel amazing. I feel like you probably don't want to groan at him,
Yeah.
but maybe he's chill with that.
But also
So like
I
I feel
like,
safe around you is like,
The safest option, right?
yeah, but it's also
but it's like I don't. I
Yeah.
personally don't.
yeah.
This dog is yelling at me.
It's true. They also have a big horn on their head that could definitely kill me.
Yeah. Chill out, Willia is also not.
It seems almost insulting.
That's dismissive.
Yeah.
I think this is supposed to be the right option.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I also, so the dev was talking when in the panel about this game of like in early editions of the game, they had terms like dumb or stupid or things like that. And there was a big conversation about how with their consultants, they like took all those words out because like you're weaponizing them for kids, even if you're trying to teach against them.
Yeah.
I see you nodding, so I think that's something you're probably pretty aware of in your work that you're doing. And yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so you have so many friends here.
Oh, okay.
I always recommend playing the chicken one because
Which
it
one's the
heals
chicken?
you.
This one?
Yeah,
Okay.
it comforts you and it heals Billy every time you play them.
I'm gonna not get the
But
big
remember, there's
news.
one row that's most threatening, so you probably don't want to play them all in the same row.
This one?
No, like remember how they scared your
yeah,
friends
yeah,
away? Yeah. So spread them out is my.
So there was a tutorial, I just skipped it.
Yeah, you're like where the kids ended yesterday
Gotcha.
in their play.
Gotcha. Okay. I thought I pressed new game, but maybe I was wrong.
No, you're like where the kids were stuck. And there's a world where you're not supposed to deal with Alpha Roar until you have more friends.
Gotcha.
But he scares away one friend every round, it looks like. So here's your mini game.
I can't do this.
Well, get ready. You have another one coming up. So this one you have to move it and then click the button.
What?
Arrow keys.
I don't
V.
like this.
So I will say one of the challenges. Oh, you got something right.
Okay.
I think maybe it's helping you out.
I am curious now how it plays on a controller.
I think it's better on a controller.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right, because like all those
yeah.
button mappings are much faster to go through.
The button mappings are hard if you're using
a computer.
if
keyboard.
you're using a keyboard with the letters that you're not used to as like a gamer.
Now, did you want to keep going through this combat and play it out? You're welcome to.
I don't know. How do we beat? Do we know how to beat this?
Yeah, you beat him
I'm
once you fill in
assuming
all
like
of the
fill out
circles.
all those like
So you are
symbols.
1 out of 10 for beating Alpha Roar right now.
I think maybe this is a good point.
I think we got
Is there
some
an
vibes there,
escape?
right?
That's good. No.
So I think what we'll do now is we'll move kind of to like the table over there, and we'll just kind of debrief about the event space and
Okay.
kind of the games here, and just have a
Sounds
little
good.
conversation about your work and educational games more broadly, and that'll be the end of the day.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, I mean, we're like the point here. It's meant to be kind of like a laid back end to kind of the Bad Game Arcade because it's a game thing. It's not supposed to be like crazy and stressful. And I appreciate you both kind of joining me because you were able to kind of watch a bunch of kids in this space and work with them as they like were playing through these games and then talking about the basic design. And you've also seen, at least if not played, a good chunk of what's in this space here. And so how do you feel about like most of the games here? I mean, I had intent behind a lot of this event, and so I'm curious to see how you all feel.
Is that why it's called Bad Games Arcade?
Yeah.
So you're not a fan of most of the titles.
I don't know. There was a lot that I found really interesting, and I was just like, oh, if there was like, if it was better to play, I would like totally be invested in the story, or like, this is a really cool idea. Again, it's just like there's too much noise happening, and there's too much happening in this game when I'd rather just have it focus on one or two like game mechanics or something like that. But
yeah, I think what I found interesting, especially with the kids, is with kids, they know what they like, they know what they don't like.
Oh, yeah.
So
they can be brutally honest.
Yes, exactly. If they
Savages.
if they didn't like something, they said it's bad. Although I did see a couple kids hesitating, and I wonder it's because I look like an authority figure when I asked them.
No, it's true, because I went up to a group. So there's that Know It or Not game, which is, I mean, I actually feel like I'm insulting games by calling it a game, because it is a quiz with a point system. It is a gamification artifact. And I went over to a group that were playing it, and I was like, so this is a good game, because in my opinion, I would not call it a good game. I would call it a point system, or like a, and they were like, yeah. And I was like, really, this game is good. And then they started giggling, and I was like, okay, so you're laughing, so is it a good game? And the one girl was like, well, not really. And I'm like, so it's not a good game? They're like, no. And I was like, why? And like, well, it's about COVID, and then you don't do anything, right? And like, there was this weird thing of like, for a lot of them, like, they're not great games, but also I had the same thing with, we had an Atari setup, and there's a Fun with Numbers is an old Atari game where you just input the answer to a math equation. And the kid told me that, oh, this game's amazing. And I was like, why? They're like, well, it's better than a worksheet, right? And like, that tells you something about the state of educational games. If it's just like, if the baseline is better than a worksheet, and a game from the 1980s or 70s, 80s is still like exciting.
There were kids who played the Atari, and they're like, it's bad because it's old.
Yeah.
Well, that was it's true. You get both sides there.
Yeah. Or it's just like there were the some groups who decided to play like 3D. What was it, tic-tac-toe? Or
Yes, that one.
Yeah, and they were so confused because like, I don't really know how to change things. I don't know, like, but a lot, like, you had some kids who were just be like, no, I'm gonna stay here, I'm gonna figure this out. And then you had others who were just like, all right,
Couldn't be
I
bothered.
gave it a good 5 minutes, I'm done. Right?
Yeah.
And that's also like a pretty significant like tell about your game if like the kid decides to like, okay, like
Quit within 5 minutes.
yeah, which is like for some of the arcade games or like some of the games over here, you'd find that happen, right? Like they don't know how to play the game, or if like nothing really interesting is happening, they're like, all right, whatever, I'm gone.
So I guess like my question for you both, since you're both in the design space for this and you got to check out some of the games here, like what are the key problems that we keep seeing in like the quote unquote bad or not so great educational titles? Like what are the kind of the same things over and over? So you mentioned earlier like too much going on.
Yeah, it's almost like you get like the opposite ends of the spectrum, where it's like there's like, you know, all these like cool particle effects and like looks pretty, there's like animations happening, but like you don't really know what's going on. It's too much, it's too much noise, and they just get overwhelmed and
but the exact opposite is true too, right? Like you can have a game with not enough noise.
It's basically like a worksheet, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like they get super bored and they're like, why am I doing this?
Yeah, I think I guess if there isn't too many mechanics, it's the other issue is there's too much stuff to read, and that is also an issue, especially with like younger kids. And like there was I think a gardening board game.
Yeah, it's a playtest version.
Which the idea was super interesting, and I was glad that a couple kids wanted to try to play, but they needed me or somebody else to help them read the rules and to figure out how to play the game.
So, I mean, for both of you, how much of your time is spent thinking about like the rules and how they're explained to your players?
A lot. Or just like, how do you approach like tutorials? And like getting the player, like the first bit, like how do you get them engaged in the game and also like understand how to play the game, right? Like what does modeling look like? I use modeling instead of tutorial because it's like you're kind of showing them how to play the game. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like using arrows to like point out like, hey, you can click this, right? There's so many better ways to emphasize like things that are interactable or like things you could focus on.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I would say on the other end of the spectrum, as a software developer, sometimes it's hard to create the tutorial if you don't have the game built.
Right.
Yes.
And so that is another issue. And so sometimes it's like, okay, we have to build the game. Now we got to think about the tutorial. But the issue was that we probably should have thought about the tutorial at the beginning.
It's kind of, I feel like it's never just like do this first and then.
Yeah.
It's more like when I start my process, it's more about like, okay, what kind of game mechanic am I focusing on? How would this be represented in a game? And then it's like, okay, like how would I, if I was a kid, how would I actually like go about
engaging with it? Yeah.
Exactly.
It's really interesting because like in my work, a lot of the games I design are meant to like represent or reflect certain spaces that are relatively abstract or complex. Like I'm trying to talk about social media in a game, and how do you talk about something that's so intangible like social media in something physical like a board game? And so one of the first things that I always do, and I've been recommended to do in design, is to start with my rule book. Is to like, here's my idea, I have a general like look for it, but like what are the rules of the game? And then I go back to that rule book like every few months and be like, okay, what has changed in all the playtesting we've done?
Yeah.
But that doesn't sound like it's the same case in the approaches that you're both taking.
I think if you have multiple people working on one game, there comes a certain point where your work intertwines with each other, and so either one of you has to start working ahead of the other person.
Right.
Like for example, I have to build something that the product designer is wants to make, but the product designer doesn't have all the specifications or acceptance criteria yet. So I'm almost kind of coding in the dark.
Experience.
Yeah. So sometimes I'm like coding in the dark, but then also it doesn't turn out the way that the product designer wanted it to be.
Wait, so you're just coding in the dark? Like, doesn't that kind of feel like wouldn't that sometimes feel like you're wasting your time if you're coding without kind of that direction?
In a way, yes. But unfortunately, sometimes I'm the one who gets to working on that project before the designer does. And so I have no choice but to try to build a foundation first before the design gets to me.
That's interesting.
Right. Oh, that's that's really interesting because it's like, I feel like as like the game designer, that might be, I don't want to say failing, but like that might be something like, because then it feels like the design itself and like the expectations haven't been communicated.
Yeah.
Right. Because it almost feels like you need to have like a requirements of like, and this is something we went through with the kids, right? Like during their brainstorming, it's like, what do you need in order to make this game, right? Like we need to have a character that we can move around, or we need to be able to like do this with the soccer ball, right?
Yeah, it was. Well, the other thing I thought was really interesting with the kids, but all the kids that we've had in here, which is like close to 60 or 70 students, all of them wanted to make video games. None of them, even when they're walking through the space, they kind of just ignored the card games and the board games in the space. They always wanted video games. Why do we think that is?
I just wanted, can you repeat that? Sorry.
Like, why do we think kids are so enamored with digital over analog systems when it comes to like their own design and their own tools?
I think the assumption is almost like when they want to build a game, it's automatically going to be a video game. Like it's like they don't realize that a board game or card game or even the games they play in the playground are the games
I
that
think
they've
they forget
developed.
tag exists.
Yeah.
Like I really
Yeah, well, like I think that's something that we talked about with them as well, right? Like as soon as like they think of game, they automatically assume digital, like video games. They kind of forget about like, oh, well, like, you know, there's all these like playground games that you've created or you play, and there's like,
Yeah. I mean, I know that I'm a bit biased bringing up this question as a person that makes analog games, and I'm like, they're really helpful and they're really powerful, but it's not just kids that think that way. Like when we're looking at the larger space of educational games, people always want a digital option. And that's not to say that they're bad, but I think there's a lot of different affordances. Like, and I'm curious for you both, because one of the things that I always talk to people about is like, when you make an analog game, you typically involve people sitting at a table and then playing through a game socially. When you make a video game, it typically involves a kid in front of a screen playing independently. Maybe a teacher comes around and asks them questions. And so do you see your products as like social or like cohesively collaborative products? And is that something that you can even think about when you're making educational video games?
God.
Do you mean social as in when the players play it, it's a social thing, or when we're developing it, it's social?
Well, I would assume the development is relatively social, but maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe.
I mean, yes or no, yes and no,
It has
in a
to
way,
be.
yeah.
Yeah, I would assume it like the
Yeah.
development is collaborative, but I'm thinking like through the play itself, right? Like, because board games are inherently like a collaborative, whether or not you're competing with each other, you're all at a table and you're talking, right? Whereas when you're
Yeah.
playing a video game, you're playing by yourself. And so I wonder if like, because for
I
the
think there's
teaching
a lot of different
aspects,
factors
you
as
want to be
well.
able to pull from that, right? And so
Yeah.
how do you think about that kind of independence with player-screen relationship and a teacher maybe around or a parent maybe around in design?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about like whether if you put a game in front of a child that like they can just play it on their own without help from like a
Mhm.
grown-up, that's something that you should like aim for, because essentially like what a lot of like grown-ups will do is they'll like put the iPad in front of the kid,
Yeah.
hoping to get a little bit of a break or something, right? Like the
Yeah.
idea is for like this to be like an independent activity that
Mhm.
the child can do. Again, this depends on age range, but in terms of like playing an actual game, I feel like unless it's explicitly, this is like a game that can be played with multiple people.
Mhm.
It's generally like a singular
But
activity.
a multiplayer educational game, like video game, wouldn't sell, would it? Like, is that a thing that you
I
think
mean,
you
Prodigy.
Yeah, so Prodigy is one in a way.
Right?
And I actually think the multiplayer interactions are one of the things that the kids really enjoy, and actually one of the things that some of the developers really enjoy sometimes.
Yeah.
Like when we're testing a game, it's like, oh, I'm bumping into somebody else who's also
Right, because it's open world,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
That's not to say it isn't tricky, because again, social environment, you have to
Yes.
really account for like, you're in an online space, right? And so, you know, safety concerns and all that. But like, especially if you're like thinking about designing a game that's meant for like social emotional learning, right?
Mhm.
Like that's something that there's a lot of value in having that piece of it being like multiplayer,
Yeah.
right?
And just to kind of pivot back to the space that we're in right now, I mean, the event is kind of winding down. We've already started cleaning up parts of the space.
Yep.
You did get some time in it with the kids, and you got to play some of the games. What pieces kind of stuck out to you in the time that you've been able to spend in the space?
Just one of the things that it also kind of gets like hammered into you, especially when you're thinking about like creating games for kids, is play testing. Like just having kids in the space playing your games is so valuable, because you get to see like how different age groups are engaging with your media,
Right.
right? Like it's going to be different, like especially like if you're designing a game for, you know, like 3 to 5 year olds, the way a 3-year-old will interact with your game is actually very different from a 5-year-old, right? So just kind of thinking about those nuances and how you're gonna.
Just to sit on that for a second, because I'm personally really curious, because when I was teaching, right, you'd have kids that were all, 6 in your classroom, but some of them are functioning at the, educational capacity of a 4-year-old, and some are functioning at educational capacity of an 8-year-old. And so like, are you thinking about that alongside age? Because like how are you
Yeah.
thinking about like that variance within like your grade 3s that you're like designing a game for?
Yeah, like how do you account for like scaffolding,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Which is something
to
you,
use
like,
the
think
education
about.
term.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, that's something you think about, right? Like as a teacher, right? And you have to account for that when in your classroom, because you are dealing with like people at like using different learning abilities,
Mhm.
and also like I guess different levels of like where they're at, right? Like reading levels and that sort of thing. But like in games, we don't really account for that. Like I don't actually see that used very often. I think in Prodigy they kind of do that. Like they go based on like your understanding and your like math ability.
Yeah.
I guess.
The game modulates based off how well you're doing, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, it does.
Because I'm pretty sure I cannot die in that game. I'm pretty sure I've tried extensively to die in Prodigy, and I cannot.
It's possible to lose all your health in a battle, and then what happens is that your pal, whose
Saves
name is
you?
Newt, saves you and then takes a couple of gold pieces from you at the same time.
Yeah, but also like when you think about just like literacy, that's something that like I think in the Peppa games were like thinking about as well.
Right.
Like the app that we're working on is designed for like 3-4-year-olds, right? So that of course like that age range is very different. You're thinking about like preschool age. How are you kind of incorporating like English language learning for that age range? And like because you're not like you can't use a lot of text. I can't read, right?
Can you rely on audio? Like, can we expect our players to listen?
Yeah, I mean the audio is super important then at that age, right? Visuals as well. So
Interesting.
I think also one other thing that you made me just think of is definitely just if your game doesn't need to have text, you could try don't if it's possible. There is a game in this space about, I believe, recycling. I saw a couple kids playing. There was a kid in the previous group who is a foreign exchange student and I think was able to play that game pretty easily. And I'm pretty sure that was the only game I ever saw her playing.
yeah. In that case, it was using like primarily symbols.
Yes.
And
right?
colors.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really powerful. And I think actually board games do that really well a lot of the time, because a lot of board games, or like playing card games, like not Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering is like millions of blocks of text, but like a lot of other card games just have symbols on the card. And then as long as you've read the rule book, you know what the symbols mean and then you do the thing, which I think some video games are able to like do really well, but I think especially narrative adventure games rely heavily on text when they don't need to. Like you can make a story game that's actually light on the intensity of the narrative, which is, I think people sometimes forget about in game design. But, oh, sorry, please.
Oh no, I was just gonna say there's a lot of value in using symbols, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that if you use it consistently, that just like makes, especially if you have like an app with like different mini games, then it's like it's a lot easier for like kids to recognize that, and they're like, okay, yeah, I get what this is supposed to do. Like I get that this is the teaching moment. I gotta like pay attention. This is the part where I can like that I'm playing, right? And oh, this is a hint for me, right? You know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so, Winnie, just because we were on this question more generally, what's something that stuck out to you kind of in your time in this space?
I would say, also going back to your previous question about kind of like the difference between like an educational game versus versus like a game that's not an educational game, it could be like an indie game or something else, is obviously the educational aspect. And I think the delivery of how the educational aspect goes, it's not, sometimes it's definitely a hit or miss with educational games.
I feel like you have examples in your head right now. Like I can almost see them like just sitting there at the edge. You just don't want to mention them.
No, I don't. There are a few, and I think, as Sharina has said, the best thing to kind of figure out if your game is doing the thing you want it to do is to get the target audience, like get it in the hands of the target audience.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, but I would also, devil's advocate, say that like sometimes the target audience will be like, oh yeah, this game like teaches me this, but it's not doing it effectively because it's relying on like a quiz style gamification system like some of the ones in the space here, or it's relying on like a very like simplistic no agency storyline. And so is that like, are we allowed to say that that's still a good educational game if like it's using very simple models or like very like low effort reward systems, but it's getting the learning across? Like, is that?
Well, how do you know it's getting the learning across? That's the thing, right?
Well, I mean, I feel like if you play a quiz game and you quiz someone after, they're going to have learned something. But in my opinion, is that effective assessment of the game's success?
Yeah.
I feel like
That's
it's
true, 'cause, like-
educational game means there has to be some sort of fun or engaging
I mean, yeah.
aspect to it. So I don't believe it was successful.
I think the word fun is really interesting here. Not
And
like,
that's why I said engaging.
like, because I'm trying to figure out like what is the fun part for the kids, right? Like in Rainbow Billy, I think there's a lot of colors and like there's a fun like aesthetic to the game, and maybe even the gameplay itself can be fun because of the mini games that are all kind of boiled in, or like Life on the Edge, where you're like trying to keep a cell alive, can be really fun if you like the tension. But like a kid telling me they enjoyed the Atari game just because it wasn't a worksheet, like for them that's fun just because it's different, right? But I wouldn't call putting an answer into a math question on an Atari fun. You know what I mean? But like, is that fair to say that like just baseline having a game is better than a worksheet, so games are inherently engaging and fun for that reason?
I don't know if beats a worksheet is beats a worksheet is a very low bar.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So like, where's the bar? I mean, and I don't know if you know this. Like, this is what I've been still trying to like suss out of. Like, where's the bar of like an acceptable educational game, and like where can we actually look at a game and be like, nah, man, you missed the mark. Like, that game is not. It's not a game.
Like I do know a couple of teachers who use that quiz style.
Kahoot?
Yeah, Kahoot, or there's another one, Gimmet or something. I
Don't know
forget what it's
Gimmet.
called. I might be.
I mean, I've been out of
pronouncing it
the teaching classroom for 4 years now, so I'm
Like,
a little
yeah.
behind the curve on the new quiz. Yeah, right. Like, I mean, I remember loving like, did you ever play like Around the World in school, where like you had to like stand up and you went to the person's desk behind you, and then the teacher asked you both a question, and then whoever answered first got to move on, and then if you got all the way back to your desk after going through all the rows, you won the game.
I have never
like,
played that.
That was, I
A
mean,
long time ago.
it was hype. It was called Around the World. Amazing game. I mean, but in reality, it's just a quiz game. Like, it's just a quiz game with some kind of like physical components of like moving, right? Like,
Yeah.
but as a kid, that was amazing. Like, it was way better than like actually writing a test.
Because there's like challenge, there's a bit of competition, there's like things that helped, like they made it more engaging.
Yeah,
Right?
but
Again, we keep going back
Yes.
to that, but yeah.
yeah. So like, I guess is engaging. What parts of the game needs to be engaging? Because like, I can make like a really like pretty game that like catches the eye, but.
Yeah.
Is it like, so is it the aesthetic? Can we like rely just on the aesthetic, just on the mechanics? Like, where's that blend kind of fit together? Like, is there a formula, I guess is what I'm really getting at, to like making a good educational game?
I don't think there's a specific formula. It really
I
depends
think
on
that's
what you're
we're
trying to make.
figure out, right? Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's, I feel like that's something that, like, specifically educational games, where like, right now, there's more of a push to like figure out that balance. Of like making something that's fun, but you also like, you're kind of building on that like understanding of a concept.
Mhm.
Because like one of the things with the quizzes that, and this is something that isn't like just for games, this is like, taking like testing in general, right?
Yeah.
What we find is like you're teaching to the test, you're not teaching to understand it, right? So like, again, it goes into like what exactly you're trying to get out of this. Is it just like, is this game just there to reinforce concepts that you're already learning? Or
Mhm.
are you trying to teach them something new? Because when you think about like games, like all games are teaching you something, right? It just depends on like what it is.
I mean, that actually came up in some of the panels where we
Yeah.
were talking about like, do we actually need to make our own educational products, or should we work with what kids are already interested in and then twist them into educational boxes, right? And I mean, you're kind of doing that a bit with Peppa Pig.
Yeah.
I
but,
mean,
like,
I
when you
think Peppa Pig
about-
was always designed as like a somewhat educational kids show, or maybe it was just like,
Yeah, like it's play first. right?
Yeah.
But okay, that goes into just like learning through play in general, right? Like when we think of like lower grades, like preschool, kindergarten, there's a lot of that play aspect, right? And
Yeah.
there's of course different types of play, right? That like engages like kids. Some kids don't like some forms of play, which is like, like more creative types of play, where you're like focused on like building that story within you, right? Some kids like needs more of a rule set, right? They need rules to play by, right? Some
Well, yeah, they can't handle the open structure, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
fair.
Yeah. And so some kids like disruptive play more, right? And they learn through that, which is like totally, I mean,
The
yeah.
anarchists,
Violence.
Yeah.
smashing.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. And when you think about it, like, again, going into Minecraft, like that's like more imaginative, like creative play, because you're literally putting a person in an environment and you're like, go at it. Like you can build if you want to, you can like create your own little like adventure game within this if you want to, right?
Mhm.
Like, so just thinking about that.
Yeah. I mean, did you want to add anything?
Anyway.
I mean, you covered a lot there. So.
Yeah, I
That was
know,
a
like
lot.
that's like
Yeah.
a little snippet of like something, but like just think of like how you have different types of like games, you have different types of
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
players.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like for example, with Prodigy, there's the math game, and the math game is sometimes a bit more. It has to do with a lot of like battling
Mhm.
and like being in conflict
Mhm.
against another thing, and that's not how everybody plays. That's what
Yeah.
we've noticed. Some people just love to interact with their friends, or they just want to build things in their house, or just design their characters.
So is it on us as like if we're trying to, us being like the educators, those trying to like teach something, to then make sure that the learning bleeds into every aspect of those kind of games? That like when you're building your house, there's something to do with learning there. That when you're purchasing things from the shop, there's something to learn there. Like, or because I mean, sometimes you also see like games that are educational that are just like, you could dress up a character, but then every 5 minutes you have to answer some questions. But if you get them right, you can get more time to dress up your character. You know what I mean? Like, how much of everything needs to be a learning moment, and how much of everything can just be like experiencing a game?
Well, that's a hard question to answer.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry I asked the hard question.
So my question with the dress up game with the questions is like, why? Because it's like,
Yeah.
why do you need to have,
Why bother? Yeah.
yeah.
No, I mean, because I remember I used to run that when I was, well, I didn't used to run it, but like when I was tutoring second and third graders on like reading and writing, we would look up reading games together, and they were like, oh, I have this website, and they pulled up a website in the browser, and that's the game they wanted to play because they just wanted to make their like pretty character with their like cool outfit. And then it was just like occasionally they had to like fill in a sentence. And like I remember sitting there as like the teacher being like, I don't like this. Just read a book. Like stop. Like, what is the dress actually doing to this? Right? It's meant to be that
Yeah.
motivation. But I guess I wonder like how much should we use games to teach kids to be motivated for like those kind of rewards versus like use the interesting side of games to encourage them to just play.
So for me personally, it's like, I feel it's really valuable to be able to use games to help. I mean, like, if we think about it, that's like, in teaching, we try to use that as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we try to avoid using the worksheets, which is like, it's dry, it's boring. It's not really like conducive to learning.
If a teacher ever listens to this, and don't get
know,
me, you
but
can use a worksheet. It's not
can.
like it's not.
But it's not the be all end all, right?
Yeah.
And you'll have more fun. And they'll like your students will be more excited or like more motivated to learn things if it's like
Yeah.
there's more of like a play element or a fun element to this, right? And I think one of the things like with educational games is like being more mindful of like what are you trying to teach them, and why is this particular game concept going to help you, right? It shouldn't be like this separate thing, we're gonna mash them together and hopefully it works.
Yeah.
Right? Like how
It should feel
Yeah.
cohesive.
exactly.
Which I mean, that's kind of your job too, right? Is to make it feel cohesive.
Yeah, and I do have to say, like, one thing about these educational games or ed tech games it's kind of to teach you something, but in other cases, it's just kind of like a add-on to what you've learned in school. It's not necessarily the thing that's teaching you the thing, it's just reinforcing what you've already learned.
Yeah, and I think that's actually where like a quiz game can shine, because quizzes do very quickly help educators determine if a kid understands like a very simple concept. I think
Yeah.
relying on quizzes can be a problem, and like all I'm getting at is like I'm not against someone making a quiz game. I'm just against them kind of touting it as like some be all end all way to teach things, because I don't think you're learning a ton through quiz. You're reviewing through a quiz.
Exactly. It's again about like, I guess, intent, right? Because like you have trivia games, right? Why do people like trivia games?
I hate trivia, but most people like it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's fine too, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not your jam.
Well,
but, like,
and that's the other thing too, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I think there's a larger question that I think I'll linger on post the event, which is, and people sometimes would ask the question of like, well, why games? Like, what makes games unique? But for me, it's like, it's not always why games so much as like reliance on games, or like, is it almost sometimes when we're thinking about learning and everyone as a learner, is it almost unethical sometimes to force a kid to play a game about a subject? Like if a kid doesn't want to play and then you're being like, I want you to play, that's almost antithetical to the nature of play as a idea,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Like to force them to sit down and play through some crummy math game that you've put together, no offense to whoever put it together, but like all you're doing is building a negative relationship to that, because they're being forced to have, like, you cannot force fun.
No.
And games in education can sometimes try to do that in a way that I think is,
I do have to say, just games in general
yeah,
can sometimes just
Yeah.
not be fun.
it's true. But like, typically when you're playing a game commercial on your own, you can just stop.
Yes.
Whereas like if a teacher puts it in the classroom in front of you and your assignment is to play the game for 15 minutes and then answer paper or like talk about it, then all of a sudden that agency that comes with like your choice to play or like leave it, because I mean there are crappy games that are in every industry. I mean there are tons of games in my Steam library that I've played for 5 minutes and then I'm never touching that game again. But I think the difference becomes when learning is tied to it, because all of a sudden it can build like really negative perspectives of certain curriculum or certain ideologies because they came across it through this like very forced space. I mean, I still hate certain books because I had to read them in like high school, and I probably have nothing against that book if I read it on my own. But like, I was like, I don't want to read it because I have to read it, you know.
Yeah. Because
so-
like the way you have to read it and engage with it is like,
Yeah, so I'm going to linger on that myself because I think that's a question that like no one can answer, and I think it's a question that's very theoretical to kind of sit on. But the last question, and maybe you both will struggle to answer this because your work is so focused on children, but like games for adults, educational games for adults, like should they be following same principles as kind of like what we're doing here for kids? Should they be thinking about their audience very differently? What should they be thinking about that's different?
I think as when your target audience changes, your gameplay changes and your design changes, because if you're targeting, like if you're creating an educational game for adults, there's immediately like big differences to what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
You know?
So what is like I guess like if you had to compare a difference, like if you had to make Prodigy now for like 18-year-olds, or you had to make the Peppa Pig game for 18-year-old plus, like
Yeah.
what is the big difference between designing for children and designing for kind of an adult audience that you would start to think about?
Story.
Yeah, story. Again, like talking about design as well. So like how you approach, like I feel like with kids, you have to simplify a lot of things, whereas with adults, not as much. The
You
way you
can-
use symbolism, like
You can have more text as well.
true, yeah.
You can, but should you?
You can. Well,
Again,
you know.
depends.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry, I'm blanking.
No, because like one of the things that I've noticed,
but-
because like I look at games that are designed for general audiences and are typically at least like they're 14 plus, because they're games about fake news and disinformation. And while younger children will engage in that, it's less common of a concern for those ages. And I noticed that a lot of those games really kind of revert back to like very traditional game design mechanics. Like they fall back on the quiz game approach. They fall back on the simple narrative adventure, or like the card games are like make a headline, like they're party game aesthetics. They're not like, and weirdly, like it's almost as if as your audience gets more general and older, you kind of forego any interesting mechanics and you just kind of rely on like the first thing someone thinks of when they think of a game. So I was just curious, as like people working with young audiences, if you see that similarity.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just thinking right
No,
now. I'm like,
no, and that's why I wanted to ask you both, because like
Yeah.
it's a space that you're not engaged in, right? Like it's a question of a space that you don't have the expertise on.
I guess educational games for adults is not a thing that is really talked about as much as educational
Okay,
games
so the
for
thing
kids.
that like came to my mind, it's like at the forefront. So like I'm like trying to learn a new language, right?
Right.
When I went to-
Duolingo.
Yeah, so like
Duolingo.
when I went into researching, like what are some like cool language apps? Like the one that always comes up is Duolingo. But then other people are like, well, actually, there's like these other apps that I prefer. There's like one that's called Lingo Legends,
Okay.
which is basically like an RPG, but you're actually learning like in this case like you want to learn like Japanese, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like teaching you from like beginner like symbols
That's
and
interesting.
everything to
Are you
full on,
playing it?
like I started it because I was like curious, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like really interesting because you are using like it kind of has like these card game mechanics in them as well. Like you're using like you are picking these as attacks, right? Of course,
Yeah.
it's like there's combat. So you're like choosing these types of attacks. You pick a type of attack, and then it like opens up like this little mini game where you have to like match a symbol to like the correct word, right? And then if you like do it correctly, then the attack hits. If you don't, it misses, right? So it's like it's using those same concepts that I actually saw in like Prodigy, right? Which is like for younger kids, and like I think there's like similar like things in like Code Combat or like
Yeah.
Have you grasped anything?
Yeah, that's my actual question.
Yeah,
Have you learned
anything?
Oh, the thing is, I've only used
Speak
it for
Japanese
like,
to us fluently. Go.
Like I've only used it for a couple days now, right? So like again, there's like a lot of like the repetitive nature of like,
Yeah.
okay, here's the symbol again. What does it mean? And I know Duolingo uses a lot of those like kind of game mechanics to help. with
Lots
that as
of
well.
the streak alone, right?
And so one of the things that people like when they're reviewing it, what they talked about was how like you're learning like the words, but like when it comes to grammar and like actual like sentence structure, you're not really learning that. And so people who are like looking specifically for that understanding, they go to a different app.
Yeah.
Right.
sure.
So I feel like with adults, they're a lot more intentional with like what they want to go for.
And they have more agency in just like choosing to play.
Exactly.
Like
yeah.
there's a weird thing where like I'm surprised that the games are so simple sometimes, because I'm like, you have an audience that you actually have to like hook into your game. Like if a teacher picks it up for their classroom, I'm sorry, but those kids are just gonna have to play it. But like for me as an adult, for the most part, I mean, a kid can put up a fight and like get out of it. But like, like for me as an adult, like if I pick up a game on my phone and I don't want to play it, then I'm just not going to play it. Like I have that ability to do. Now my daily streak might motivate me to keep going, which is why they have those things. But still, well, I mean, it is almost 3:00, and so I feel like we've been at this for a long time. And so, unless you have any other comments that are burning in your brains or minds or in general, then I feel like we can bring this to a close.
Yeah, I guess. Do you have anything to
You're
add?
good. No, I've reached. I feel like I've reached my limit.
Yeah, no,
I was just like,
I
think
looked
you
at the clock,
noticed I was just like, I'm starting to fade.
No, I looked at my
Like,
clock and I was like, we have been at this for a
wait,
very
what are
long
we doing
time. So,
again?
I mean, I do want to thank you both for your energy and time just to come in and share your expertise, both with me, or anyone who's listening, and also just the kids yesterday. I know that they got a lot out of it. And also for anyone who is, still with us, thank you for being part of this event week. It's been, at least for me, a really like a fantastic time to kind of see some of the products that are out there, seeing what people are, hearing what people are thinking about, and kind of interviewing all these fantastic individuals. So I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And I wish anyone who attended a wonderful rest of whatever they're up to. So thank you.
Thank you.
And
thanks.
happy end of Bad Game Arcade.
Yay.
Woohoo!